A large, dusty studio on the second floor of a factory in Orange, New Jersey. The spring of 1917. Long tables run the length of the room, and at them sit 70 young women, most of them still teenagers, bent over trays of watch dials that will be shipped to soldiers on the Western Front. Each woman holds a fine camel hair brush. Beside her sits a small crucible of pale green-white paste that glows faintly in the shadows under the table. The paste is called undark, and it is worth gram for radium gram, more than gold. An 18-year-old named Grace Fryer dips her brush and does what the forewoman has taught every girl in the room to do. She raises the bristles to her lips, rolls them into a sharp point between her tongue and her teeth, dips them in the luminous paste, and paints a number onto the face of a watch. Lip, dip, paint. Lip, dip, paint. A skilled painter can do 250 dials a day, and with each one she swallows a little more of the brightest poison ever discovered. Nobody in that room believes they're being poisoned. They believe they have the best job in town. The pay is triple what a factory girl could earn anywhere else. The material is so glamorous, the newspapers call it a wonder element. And it is so beautiful in the dark that the girls paint their fingernails with it and their teeth and dab it on their eyebrows, so that when they go dancing that night they will glow. This is the story of what that glow cost them, and of the years it took the women who were told they were perfectly safe to prove, from their deathbeds, that a company had been quietly killing them the entire time. To understand how young women ended up eating radioactive paint 250 times a day, you have to go back to the strange, delirious love affair the world was having with radium. Radium had been isolated in 1898 by Marie and Pierre Curie, extracted from tons of uranium ore in almost invisibly small amounts. It was fantastically rare and fantastically expensive. At its peak, it was one of the most costly substances on Earth. And it did something that seemed like magic. It glowed on its own, endlessly, drawing on some hidden energy no one fully understood. To a public that did not yet grasp what radiation did to living tissue, that self-generated light looked less like danger and more like health, like vitality, like life itself bottled in a jar. So radium was put into everything. There was radium water sold as a tonic, radium toothpaste, radium face cream promising a youthful glow, radium suppositories, even radium chocolate.
Ah, the true elixir of perpetual youth.
Wealthy men drank radium-laced patent medicines by the bottle, convinced it was making them stronger. The element that would later be understood as a bone-seeking carcinogen was, for a brief window, marketed as a health food. And in a factory in New Jersey, a scientist named Sabin Arnold von Sokhocki found the most profitable use of all. By mixing radium with zinc sulfide, he created a glowing paint that could make a watch dial readable in total darkness. He called it Undark. The company that made it, the Radium Luminous Materials Corporation, later renamed the United States Radium Corporation, set up a studio in Orange and hired young women by the dozen to hand-paint the dials, because women had smaller hands and finer control than men. There was one detail the company never mentioned to the painters, and it is the detail on which the entire tragedy turns. The men who worked with radium in the same building, the chemists, the scientists, von Sokhocki himself, handled it with obvious caution. They used lead screens. They picked up radium samples with ivory-tipped tongs at arm's length. They wore lead aprons. They knew, because it was already known in scientific circles, that concentrated radium could burn flesh and damage tissue. The girls upstairs were handed brushes and told to put them in their mouths. When one painter asked whether the practice of pointing the brush with her lips was safe, she was reassured. The radium, she was told, would put roses in her cheeks. It was good for you. Some of the women were so unworried that they used the paint as makeup and brought leftover material home. They had no reason to doubt the men in charge. Why would a respectable company in a country that sold radium as medicine put its own workers in danger? The answer is chemistry, and it is merciless. Radium behaves inside the human body almost exactly like calcium. When the women swallowed those tiny amounts of paint day after day, their bodies did not flush the radium out. Their bodies mistook it for the mineral that builds bone and carefully filed it away into their skeletons, their jaws, their spines, their hips, their teeth. And there it stayed. Radium does not simply sit. It decays, and as it decays, it fires off alpha radiation continuously from the inside, in every direction, into the living bone packed around it. The women were not being exposed to radiation from a distance. They were becoming radioactive. Each one had, in effect, swallowed a source that would now irradiate her own skeleton for the rest of her life. And the half-life of radium is measured not in years, but in centuries. The bone began to die, and the first place the dying showed was the mouth. It began with a toothache. One of the earliest to fall ill was a painter named Amelia Maggia, known to everyone as Molly. In 1921, a tooth began to ache. A dentist pulled it, then the tooth beside it. Where the teeth had been, ulcers formed instead of healing, bleeding, filled with pus, refusing to close. The rot spread through her mouth and into her jaw. At one point, her dentist reached into her mouth and lifted out a piece of her lower jawbone with his fingers. It had disintegrated that completely. The decay moved into the rest of her body. On September 12, 1922, Molly Maggia died of a massive hemorrhage when the ruined tissue of her throat finally gave way. She was 24. The doctors who signed her death certificate wrote down a cause that was not only wrong, but cruel. Syphilis. It was a convenient diagnosis. It shamed the dead woman, it protected the company, and it explained nothing. But it went on the record, and the company was happy to let the story spread that these were simply girls of loose morals dying of a shameful disease, rather than employees dying of their work. More of them were falling ill now. Grace Fryer had left the studio in 1920 for a better-paying job as a bank teller. About 2 years later, her teeth began to loosen and fall out, and an abscess bloomed in her jaw. Her back began to fail. Eventually, she would need a steel brace just to sit upright because her spine was crumbling. Doctor after doctor could not or would not name the cause. It was not until 1925 that a physician finally suggested her disease might be connected to the glowing paint she had once pointed with her lips. That same year, the sickness acquired both a name and a witness. The name was radium jaw, the term doctors began using for the grotesque destruction of the jawbone seen in the dial painters. The witness was a pathologist named Harrison Martland, the medical examiner of Essex County, New Jersey. Martland set out to prove what was killing these women, and he built tests to do it. He could measure the radioactivity in their breath and their bones. He demonstrated that their bodies were, quite literally, radioactive, that the women were exhaling radon gas, that their bones would fog photographic film in the dark, simply by lying against it. To settle the question of Molly Maggia, whose death had been blamed on syphilis, her body was exhumed in 1927, 5 years after burial. What they found buried the lie for good. When Molly's remains were examined, her bones were still glowing. Pressed against photographic plates in a darkened room, her vertebrae printed their own image onto the film. Bright vertical marks, like a row of matches burning in the dark. There was no sign of syphilis anywhere. There was only radium, still shining inside her skeleton half a decade after it had killed her. The evidence was now overwhelming. The company's response was to fight harder. The United States Radium Corporation had, by some accounts, already commissioned its own studies and known for years that something was wrong. But publicly, it denied everything. It funded reassuring examinations by a physician the women trusted, only for the results to be twisted or buried. It disputed the science. it ran out the clock. And the clock was a genuine weapon because New Jersey law at the time gave a worker only a narrow window, a matter of months to a couple of years, to file a claim for an occupational illness. Radium poisoning could take 5 years or more to declare itself. By the time a dial painter understood what was happening to her body, the law had often already closed the door. Grace Fryer decided to sue anyway. It took her 2 years just to find a lawyer willing to take the case. On May 18, 1927, a young Newark attorney named Raymond Berry agreed to represent her and filed suit against U.S. Radium. 4 other dying women joined her: Quinta MacDonald, Albina Lariste, Edna Hussman, and Catherine Schaub. The press gave them a name that was accurate and monstrous at the same time. The case of the 5 women doomed to die. The phrase was not hyperbole. By their first court appearance in January 1928, 2 of the 5 were bedridden and could not attend. Those who could come to court could not raise their arms high enough to take the oath. Their shoulders and spines had deteriorated too far to lift a hand. They had, their own doctors estimated, very little time left. The company's legal strategy openly relied on that fact: delay, adjourn, postpone, and wait for the plaintiffs to die before a verdict could be reached. It very nearly worked, but the case had become a national scandal, splashed across newspapers that printed photographs of young women crippled by the jobs they had been told were safe. Under that pressure, in the autumn of 1928, U.S. Radium settled out of court. Each of the 5 women received a lump sum reported at $10,000, plus a pension of $600 a year for life and the payment of their medical and legal costs. For women who had months or a few years to live, it was less a fortune than an admission. Money handed over precisely so that no court would ever formally rule the company guilty. And that should have been the end of it. It was not, because 800 miles west, the exact same thing was happening again to women who had been told the New Jersey scandal had nothing to do with them. In Ottawa, Illinois, a company called Radium Dial employed its own studio of young women painting dials with the same glowing paste, pointing the same brushes with the same lips. Across the whole industry, an estimated 4,000 women worked as dial painters. In Ottawa, the company had actually read the reports coming out of New Jersey. It had even quietly tested some of its own workers, and it said nothing, kept them painting, and let them keep lipping their brushes. One of those women was Catherine Wolfe Donahue. Born in Ottawa in 1903, she had painted dials for years, breathing and swallowing radium the whole time, while the company assured its workers there was nothing to fear. By the mid-1930s, her body was failing in the now familiar pattern: the jaw, the limbs, the bones. She grew so thin and so twisted that she could barely walk. And when she and the other Ottawa women tried to sue, they slammed into the same wall Grace Fryer had faced. The statute of limitations had already run out. Legally, they were too late to have been poisoned. It took until 1937 for the Ottawa women to get a hearing, this time before the Illinois Industrial Commission. And what happened in that hearing is one of the most harrowing scenes in the history of American labor. The proceedings opened on February 10, 1938. Catherine Donahue, by then weighing well under 100 pounds and unable to sit upright without pain, came to testify. At one point, she produced a small box and opened it. Inside were pieces of bone, fragments of her own jaw that had crumbled and fallen out of her face. She had kept them. When her doctor was asked, in open session, what chance she had of recovering, Catherine collapsed on the spot and had to be carried out. She was too sick to return to the courtroom, so the courtroom came to her. The commission reconvened in the Donahue family home, and Catherine gave the rest of her testimony lying on the sofa, propped up on pillows, her words slurred because the disease had deformed her mouth. From that sofa, dying, she demonstrated for the officials the exact motion that had killed her, how she had drawn the brush across her lips again and again, to make the fine point, poisoning herself with every stroke because the company had told her it was safe. On April 5, 1938, the commission ruled in her favor. It found that Catherine Donahue's slow, agonizing destruction had been caused by her work at the radium dial plant. Her award was small, a pension of $277 a year, plus medical costs, a pitiful sum for a life. The company immediately appealed. The commission threw the appeal out. The company appealed again. Catherine Donahue died on July 27, 1938. By the accounts of the case, the day after Radium Dial's lawyers filed yet another appeal against paying her. She had lived just long enough to hear that she had won, and not long enough to be paid. She was 35 years old. The company kept fighting even after she was in the ground. It carried its appeals upward through the courts until, on October 23, 1939, the United States Supreme Court refused to hear the case one final time, letting the ruling stand. Catherine Donahue had beaten Radium Dial from her deathbed, and it took the highest court in the country more than a year after her death to make it final. The people who had built this were not all spared by it. Sabin von Sochoki, the chemist who invented the glowing paint and who had once burned his own finger to the point of amputation handling radium, died in 1928. Of radium poisoning, the same disease as the women who painted with his invention. The element did not distinguish between the inventor and the girls at the tables. It only distinguished between those who had been warned and those who had not. The women who survived did not survive whole. They lived when they lived, with steel braces holding up ruined spines, with jaws that had to be partly removed, with legs that broke under their own weight because the bone had turned brittle and porous. Some developed the bone cancers that radium is now known to cause. Their skeletons remained radioactive for the rest of their lives and remain so in their graves today. Decades later, scientists studying the long effects of radiation would exhume some of the dial painters and still measure radium alive in their bones. The women had become, permanently, their own evidence. What they left behind outlived all of it. The Radium Girls cases helped force something into American law that had barely existed before. The principle that a company can be held responsible for a disease its work causes, even when the disease takes years to appear. Their suffering fed directly into the strengthening of occupational safety standards and workers' compensation, and the data collected from their poisoned bodies, some of it gathered while they were still alive, some from the graves, became a foundation of what scientists came to understand about the effects of radiation on the human body. When the first atomic workers were protected decades later, part of what protected them was written in the bones of watch painters from Orange and Ottawa. Think about the arithmetic of it. The women were hired because their hands were small and delicate enough to paint a number the width of a grain of rice. They were told the material was so safe it would make them prettier. They were taught, as a matter of company technique, to put the poison in their mouths a couple of 100 times a day. And when it began dissolving them from the inside, the men who had handled the same substance behind lead shields told the courts there was no proof of any connection at all. In the end, the proof was never really in dispute. It was in the coffin that glowed in the dark 5 years after the funeral. It was in the box of jawbone a dying woman opened in a courtroom. The companies knew what radium was. They just assumed no one would ever be able to make the dead testify. They were wrong. The dead testified. They are still glowing. If you want to know which hidden world we should reconstruct next, tell us in the comments.